we are aware somewhat,
Right.
of our, you rotter. We are aware of somewhat of gap, that we have an element of choice. So, we are absorbing, if you like, or considering, a slightly greater level of complexity, that it's not just, this has happened, I'm now already doing that. There is, an element that we're considering more about the situation. So this is the kind of proactive level, which is level 2. Level 3 is a kind of emergent self. There's a sense of an emergence of ourselves. So at this level, he was describing that we still very much have black and white thinking in place, insofar as, um, you know, there's an in group and there's an out group. There's a group of people that may believe that, let's say, that vanilla ice cream is acceptable, but they're wrong. That was the example that he beautifully gave. That vanilla ice cream people, what's the matter with them? That's just an absolute nonsense. So there's, obviously there's an awareness that some people choose vanilla ice cream, but they're just wrong. There's not really a sense of, you know, that I respect their choices. It's just, they're wrong. They don't see the world as I do. And so that's this kind of sense of emergent self, that there is, I'm making sense of the world in my way and I am right. So that's kind of level 3. And then we've got level 4, which is a relational level. And now we're able to really accept that other people have different views than ours. And we can still consider that these people, that they're wrong, but that they but in relation to us, we say, well, that's wrong for me, but it might be right for them. So there, at this point, we're able to agree to differ. So this is a kind of, there's a massive shift in the complexity. You can hear as I'm describing it, there's a huge amount more information that we are responding to in the world. That there is this, this sense that this person has a living world that they're responding to, and they have their own reasons for doing what they're doing in the world. So this is level 4. And Joseph described that, most of the world does not act at this level, which is why we see, which is the existence of Twitter, really, and Facebook is all at level 3. And rarely do we ever get this kind of sense of, oh, that's an interesting opinion. That wouldn't be right for me, but I can see how you got there. That's level 4. And I think we can probably all agree that the world might be a more interesting place in terms of opportunities and possibilities. Anyway, so that's level 4. Then there is level 5. Now, at level 5, he described this as the generative level. And now we're really understanding the imposition of the world upon us, and about how we are responsible for making our own stories, how we create stories. We have more flexibility even about how we assign meaning to the world for ourselves. And we begin to think consequentially. We begin to imagine, what will be the consequences of my actions, and how can I adjust myself in the world to get a different outcome. And so this is I think Graves described it as well as in spirodynamics, a huge leap, as it were, in our ability to understand the world and ourselves. It's a huge leap in consciousness. It's described as second tier. I'm probably doing Joseph an injustice because he didn't use those words. This is my interpretation of where we are with this. But there's again a huge level of an upshift in the complexity that we're using at that level. And then finally, he described level 6, which is kind of transcendent again. We're kind of going meta to our own stories, and have this, understanding of our place in the world and everything as a system. Again, I'm adding bits in here. That's not exactly what Joseph was saying. But if there are any people here that are kind of really understand the mytho-self model that Joseph created, then one of the things that is really built into that model is generating the GDS, generalized desired state. And he described this as a level 5 experience, that GDS is level 5, this generative level. And then he went on to describe that GTS, the greater than self experience, is actually a level 6 experience. So it was quite interesting to kind of have that laid down. That was a nice piece of understanding for me. And one thing that he was really careful to talk about was about how, you know, we have this access to different levels. You know, how I conceptualize this during the week is that under pressure, you know, within friction, we are going to be accessing lower levels of data, or lower levels within this OLEM model. So we may, you know, sometimes when I'm speaking with clients, they have access to this kind of level 5 generative position. But when they talk with their mother-in-law, now we're really just talking about, you know, a level 1 reaction. You know, she's just a pain in the ass and there's nothing I can do about it. So, you know, to me, I kind of conceptualize that as a sort of friction drops us to different levels. And, you know, I quite enjoyed this week thinking about how really we're kind of trying to reclaim that functionality in different pockets of people's lives. You know, that's what they're missing. They can see, look, I can do this stuff. I can write my own stories. I can be the author and narrator of my own life. But when it comes to my boss, I can't do it. And this is the frustration of awareness and consciousness. So, you know, it just helped me see things in a different way, and to be able to, let's say, predict that how people relate to concepts is dictated by the level of consciousness that they are in at that any given moment. So Mark and I, are we ready to start? Is he here? Otherwise, I'll just carry on burbling on. Okay, that's good.
You've been doing
Keep
phenomenal.
Hey, okay, so Mark and I were talking about, oh, here comes this word, recidivism. Okay, uh, so people in prison, and if they reoffend, and Mark was talking very much about how within this state, you know, prison system, there is this really kind of strong narrative that tells the prisoners, you know, you are useless, you are rubbish, you are always going to be a criminal, this is how it's going to be for you. And you know, that's very much the narrative that is kind of that is held within the system at every level, not just as a spoken narrative. It's built into the system of the prison, that is what the prisoners experience. Now, if you can imagine, if you are adopting that level 1 mentality or level 1 consciousness, and it is a reflexive approach that you have, then receiving that message from prison, you are just going to accept that that's what it is. There isn't going to be a sense of, no, I don't want my life to be any different, because it's a reflexive response that you have to that message that's given to you for a week or 2 months or 6 years or whatever it is. That will be, as you understand yourself, that is going to happen in that way. Now, at level 2, where you do have this gap between stimulus and response, what we can say is that you might be aware that it doesn't quite represent you, but you can't quite put your finger on what it is and how you could be any different. But there is a sense that this idea that you are useless and rubbish, that you can feel that there's a gap for you, but that you still can't make any sense of it at all. So, you know, maybe there's some intervention that we can help, you know, in that regard, to help people understand that, yeah, feel that gap that you can feel before you swallow that narrative whole. That is something that we can pay attention to. At level 3, there's this sense of the emergent self. there is still this black and white thinking, but how would a prisoner hold themselves within that that environment? Well, it may well be that they think, well, I don't agree with that, they are wrong, I am right. But it still doesn't give them a pathway through to being able to create something different in their life. At level 4, you've got this kind of relational level of consciousness, and you've got this kind of sense, well, they have got their own ideas, but this is not really what I want for me. This is wrong for me, this story that I am a criminal and I'm useless. For others here, I can see that that's right for them, but for me, this is not the way that I want it to be. So I'm not making a case at all, by the way, that only prisoners with level 4 consciousness have got a hope in hell of not reoffending. We are just using this as a little bit of a framework to kind of make this a kind of workable example of how people might relate to an environment. It could be an idea, it could be a person, but this is an environment, so it's just playing around with it, really. Once you get to level 5, then let's say somebody is held within that environment, but they can understand that in and of itself is a story. Well, what is a criminal? What is a reoccurring criminal? That's just a story that they're telling. And then they can, at some level be able to choose, okay, well, I'm going to write my own story when I walk out of here. They might even have an opinion about how they ended there in the first place. And level 6, I kind of played around with the idea. Well, at level 6, this transcendent position, they're not really worried about what the story is, because they're just enjoying their time in prison. I don't know. It's just a silly thing to say. But they're just able to kind of transcend the fact that they're incarcerated and just, make use of their time there and enjoy just being human. I don't know. It's just a silly thought experiment, but we enjoyed it, didn't we, Mark, when we played?
We did. And as you were even saying that is, what are the walls that a prison, there are walls to the prison they're really there, but there are many people that are walking around in prisons of their own design, based on the stories that they tell, are limiting them from having the experience that they could be having. And it's not for lack of choice, it's just for lack of development. It's a developmental issue where they just don't yet have the capacity to be present to anything beyond those walls. And as I'm saying this, it reminds me of any of you have seen The Truman Show. In that movie, his entire life has been lived inside of an artificial television stage that was like, they showed some external shots, it was like this huge dome that probably covered acres and acres and acres, and the entire world was revolving around him, and he didn't know that everyone that was there was a paid actor, had a role to play. And he got, at some point when he became an adult, he was in this pond and he kept rowing and rowing and rowing and rowing, and all of a sudden he bumped into a wall, and there was a door, and he opened the door and looked outside, and the whole world was out there. It was just out there waiting for him, in a way. And I think as a metaphor, that really rings true in terms of all of us who have experienced these kinds of shifts in our capacity to be present to what's there, and saying, wow, I didn't notice that before. And because we notice it, either we've built a capacity, or as Joseph used last week, the word myelinated. We've become so familiar with and automated so many of the things that enable us to actually function within the walls automatically. It's all completely automated as a heuristic. We could now, because we have these really effective heuristics, we could go beyond what the limitations of our previous nervous system structure was. And the really important thing, or one really important thing, is that he stressed right from the very beginning, that there was a theory that our brains stopped developing after the age of like 30 or 35 years old. But no, in fact, our brains are continually evolving, rebuilding, growing, changing. And one of the things that I've been looking at recently is the communication methodology between stimulus and cognition, or stimulus and physiological response. And the communication is completely molecular, in that certain molecules will be sent out to the immune system, the endocrine system, the autonomic nervous system, that will stimulate organs and create hormonal changes and all these things that happen just as a result of the data that comes in. It could be called stress, but we have this thing about stress, this way that we use the word stress, which is it's not that well formed as far as I'm concerned, because every impact on us is stress. Oh, Joe just showed up. Okay, here we go. Everything that happens to us, you could say, is stress. It's just data. Stress is just data. And when we get to the fact where stress is just data, we can begin to have some control over the experience that we're perceiving. We can't change what's happening, but we can change our relationship with what's happening. So Joseph's other brain is here, but I hope Joseph's come along with it. So are you ready to go, Joe?
Just got to get in. It's just I've had a little trouble with my equipment today. Apologize.
Yeah, I had that last night, but everything worked out okay.
I'll be there probably 2 minutes. I should be able to be checked in. I just got to get the camera.
Okay,
so it works.
No worries.
But
Nicola just gave
feel free to keep going. You sound like you're on a roll.
Yeah. Well, Nicola gave us a good introduction to the OLAM model as best that she could, based on what she's received as of yet. And so what I was beginning to talk about, or getting to, was this idea that we have this choice of response. But we also don't have this choice of response when our nervous system is stretched a bit or limited a bit. And what we really want to do is begin to use this heuristic of the OLAM model to now be able to sort of create a useful shortcut, not an ill-formed shortcut, but perhaps a well-formed shortcut that will enable us to maximize what we have available to us in our own system, and then be able to generate higher level experiences on our own and with other people. So, you ready now?
I am ready.
Okay,
I see some familiar faces. Wow.
Mm-hmm.
Nice group. So let me just see. I only have I guess people don't have their cameras on, so that's why I
a lot of people don't have the cameras
okay,
on,
just checking. I see 24 people, but I don't see 24 people. So that's what threw me. Hey, Jessica. Yeah. All right. Let's see if we can get this to go away. There we go. Now my screen is all good. Hello, everybody. Sorry about that late coming.
So you want me to give you host again and not your other brain?
No, just leave it alone.
Okay. We're recording right now.
The last time was enough of a lesson for us not to have to.
So I think what I want to do perhaps is stop this. I recorded what we did so far. Maybe stop it and start again. What do you think?
Stop that. All right, there we go. Now my phone's off. Everything's off. There we go. We're good. So first question is, I know that you, it sounded like you were talking about, Nicola gave some information about OLAM and a review and all that. So any questions, comments, observations, whatever, perturbations, problems, percolations from last week? Got some old friends here. Shali, Sandra, Rachel, Tim, Dennis, I saw last week. Mike, nice to see all the good faces. Lanai, nice, all the people I know, as well as some I don't yet know. I'm just going to check out the participants so I can see who's here that is hiding behind their quiet cameras. So in the meantime, no questions, no comments, no observations, nothing from last week. You're all good. We're ready to roll forward on a completely new topic. Cool. So what I want to talk about this week was the idea of narrative and narratology and how that plays into the role of transformation specifically. And I'm not going to keep it exclusive to the idea of coaching per se, but to transformation as it applies in a broader range. See, so the fundamental premise of the work that I do, the stuff I've been doing for the last 35 years, let's call it, is that one of the things that drives identity is the embedded autobiographical narrative of the individual. So the person has a story, a mythology, let's call it, that's embedded in their way of being in the world that they're generally unaware of. It's not something that's conscious. It's not something that's fully present, but the story runs constantly in the background. And the structure of that story, as much as its content, is what drives the way you experience the world. So there's a model that I built a few years ago now, and I began writing about the idea of a theory that I had developed called the sensory control theory, right? So sensory systems control theory. And that theory had built into it a model called the ladder of perception. And this is the core, this is the center point of how I make sense of the world in terms of how others make sense of the world. So after 35 years of doing this and studying a lot of neuroscience and cognitive science and working with clients in corporate environments as well as one-to-one and personal work, what I found is that there's a general movement, you could say, from the way people take the world in as they experience it to the point where they make a decision and respond. And that movement goes from simple awareness of being present in the world and having sensation. Now, most people are unaware that they're having sensation because it goes so quickly. They're beyond sensation before they know they're having sensation. So you put your hand on a hot stove accidentally, and you don't have the sensation of the hot stove. You automatically have, oh shit, that's hot, and your hand's moving away. And you have an experience of the sensation that you've begun to already describe and experience at an abstracted level. You're not staying with the sensation. Very few people do. Very people can or know how. So almost immediately, sensation becomes what we can call sense making. So there's an awareness of the sensation beyond the direct nervous experience at the level of the neural system. And now that sensation, that sense-making process, allows you to perceive with descriptives. So you see something way off in the distance and you recognize it's spherical and it's red and it seems to be suspended in space. And then you jump from sense-making, that idea of this spherical red object suspended in space, to, oh, it must be an apple hanging from a tree or a pomegranate, depending where you are in the world, right? And you begin to now give it meaning. So from sensation, we go to sense-making. From sense-making, we leap to meaning-making. And the transition between sensation and meaning-making is probably measured in nanoseconds. Maybe if you're a very deliberate, slow thinker, microseconds. But the transition between direct sensation and meaning-making is so rapid, you don't know you've had the first two experiences of sensation and sense-making because your experience is actually of meaning-making. You're labeling the thing you're experiencing. And the next thing that happens is you begin to make decisions about what that meaning means to you. So if it's an apple, what does it mean? And it's either maybe something to ignore or something to address. If you ignore it, you've decided that it has no meaning to you in this moment because the thing is of not enough value to draw your attention. At the next level of attraction, where it becomes important to you, it's important why? Is it an object to be thrown? Is it an object to be eaten? Is it an object to be pulled off the tree to feed to your horse? It takes on meaning of some kind in decision. And then once the meaning gives rise to decision, you can then make a decision. But there's a process between meaning making and decision making, which is really interesting. There's a particular scientist, cognitive scientist in particular, who studied this idea of what he calls affordances. And the idea of an affordance is that objects in the world afford us the opportunity to interact with them in particular ways. So very simply, I can give you an example like this. For most of you, maybe some of you are particularly large-handed individuals, a regular size major league hardball affords you the opportunity to put your hand around it and hold it in your hand. A softball affords you the opportunity to do the same, but probably not to wrap your whole hand around it. Your fingers will be spread and your fingers will not close around the other side. Probably very few of you can hold in your hand comfortably a basketball. It doesn't afford you the opportunity to hold it. Does that make sense when I'm talking about this idea of affordances? That these objects in the world afford you an opportunity to do something. This cup that I brought home from Santorini affords me the opportunity to fill it with liquid. That's an affordance it has. It affords me the opportunity to hold it by its handle. It affords me different things I can do with it. I could also use it as an object to throw across the room. It affords me that opportunity. So this idea of affordances begins to immediately shape the space between sense making and meaning making. And it shapes even further and more dramatically, you could say, because of facilitation, the distance and the space between meaning making and decision making. By the way, by this time, you're telling yourself a story. You told yourself a story of coming into contact with the thing you just noticed. You tell yourself a story about what the thing itself is that you've noticed. And you're beginning to tell yourself stories about what you could do with the thing you noticed. And depending on how urgent or immediate your decision-making is, you'll start telling yourself decisions about what will happen after you do what you intend to do with the thing you see. So you see the large, round, spherical red object, and you go, it's an apple. And the story is, oh my God, thank God I took this road. I was really hungry. I was thinking about taking that other road, but I'm on this road and there's an apple tree here. There might not have been any apples on the other road, and then I would have been hungry and I wouldn't have anything to eat. But now I've got something to eat because there's apples on this road. So let me go pick an apple. That's a narrative. And then you start going, oh, when I eat the apple, that's going to be really good because then I'll have the energy to finish my trip today and I'll feel much better and I won't have this pain in my stomach where I'm feeling empty and I really need to eat something. In fact, I'm wondering if the apple is going to be sweet. I hope it's a sweet apple. I really like sweet apples. I don't like tart apples. You're telling yourself the story. And then you go, oh, once I eat the apple, what I can do is I can save the core and maybe a little bit extra and I give it to the horse because then the horse will also have something to eat and it'll be really happy with me and it'll pay attention to me and blah, 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 blah. And then once I get home, I can tell my wife about the fact that I saw an apple hanging from a tree and I picked it and I ate it. And then we can have, you get it? And then you think, well, wait a second. If I'm going to tell my wife that I picked an apple and I ate it, there's a lot of apples on this tree. Why don't I take, at least a half a dozen, maybe a dozen, maybe 2 dozen of them home and she can make apple pie because I love apple pie. Apple pie is one of my favorite things to eat. And, maybe we can have it with whipped cream because apple pie with whipped cream, that's the best. And then hot chocolate. I like apple pie with whipped cream and you're telling these stories. And the stories go on and on and on. And they loop together. And then sometimes you get into conflict with your own stories. And you go, I really shouldn't eat whipped cream because I've been trying to lose weight. And I'm like coming up with that contest I wanted to enter where I have to be in really good shape. And the whipped cream is not such a great. And now you have conflict. It's 2 stories. I really love whipped cream. And then this other story about why eating whipped cream might not be the best thing for you at this moment in your life. And now you have to resolve these 2 stories. So you tell a story about resolving the 2 stories. And narratology is this kind of study of how we make sense of narratives, what narratives are, how we make sense of them, how they're structured. And the basic structure of narrative, it's most essential, is narrative organizes time. And what I mean by that is we think of time as primarily past, present, future. And what's interesting is that there's another time that most people don't consider, but they all know about. It's the once upon a time, right? So when is once upon a time? What was that? I can't interpret the hand gesture, Lynette.
In the past.
It's past for you. So once upon a time is in the past.
Mm.
Once upon a time in a galaxy far, far away. When's that?
Far, far away.
Okay. So is it in the past?
Yes.
It is. Okay. How about once upon a time after we landed on Mars?
That's in the future.
Right. Once upon a time is outside of time. It's
right.
Literally a phrase that takes you outside of time. It doesn't define where in time things are. It's intended to say, let's move out of this time stream that you're in. And out of this time stream that you're in, anything becomes possible. Any story I can tell you outside of the time stream, as you know time to be, allows possibility to emerge because we organize reality, quote unquote, in time, right? So what's more true for you? This is a trick question. What has already happened or what you think will happen next? Sandra, I can see you're moving your head, but I ain't getting no sound.
It's it's in your mind,
Now,
it's what already happened and you're remembering, or what you are building in your mind that is going to happen in the future. But for you, it's in the same place.
Okay. So my question was, which one is more true to you? Which one do you believe more? What's already happened or what you think will happen next? Vishali, does that mean the past or the future? I don't know which direction your timeline runs in.
The past would be something that I would believe more, but I think are equally reliable.
Okay. Because you think your memories are real. Okay. See, this is the grand challenge of being human, is the idea that we think our memories are real. You know, I like to point to this one all the time. Great Harvard study. Harvard has got all kinds of money, so they can waste on all kinds of shit. They've got a huge endowment, right? And I mean money when I say endowment. So what happens is that the thing that they do is they take this money they have and they put it into these research projects, and they decide to do a 20-year longitudinal research project. They're going to get people, and they did this, it's already done. They got people to have an experience. And this was in the days of Kurt Lewin, who was doing a lot of social research and cultural studies and this kind of stuff. So 1950s, late 1940s, early 1950s, they decide they're going to ask people to come to do an experiment. They bring them in a room and they experience something. It doesn't really matter what it is. And I don't remember from the experiment what they made them do, but it was like, you know, sit down and watch a movie or sit down and put some blocks together or something. But they went through an experience. And immediately after they did the experience, they had the people write down what had just happened, literally on a legal pad, a yellow legal pad, in their own handwriting. Okay. So now they go, well, I built this little castle out of blocks and there was 17 of them. And, you know, they were red and blue and green and yellow and blah, 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 blah. So they write down, and they want it to be detailed, explicit, what explicitly occurred in this experience you just had. And then they take these and they file them away. 5 years later, they ask these people to come back and write down what happened 5 years before in this experience. They do it again at 10 years, at 15 years, and at 20 years. Now, at 20 years, they are now going to do something remarkable, because each of these reports that they now have in their files is different. So the 5-year report, the 10-year report, the 15-year report, the 20-year report are not the same as the report immediately after the event. That's not a big deal. Most people could understand that, right? It's a long time ago, 20 years. It wasn't super dramatic for them. They don't remember the details as well and all that stuff. But the details were remarkably different. So when they wrote it down initially, they said, you know, I built this little castle, was made of, you know, red and blue and yellow and green blocks, and it has 17 of them or whatever they wrote. And then later they wrote, and 20 years later, they went, there was these wood blocks and they were shellacked and varnished in natural wood. And they were, you know, about 7 of them. And I built a tower straight up, whatever they wrote. And then they gave the people the original document they wrote immediately after the event. Virtually all of them, okay, like 90 some odd % of the group of people they experimented with argued that the report they just wrote today was actually more accurate than the one they wrote immediately after the event. That somehow they had gotten it wrong when they wrote it down, or that the researchers had changed the report. Your memory is so fallible, it has nothing to do with reality. Okay. And this is really important. The reality is you're probably better able to predict what's going to happen next in an accurate way than what happened yesterday morning just before you had breakfast. That's the reality of memory. And every time we access memory, we also know something else. We rebuild it. Now, how do we do that? How do we keep our memories intact? We make them into stories. We make them into narratives. And all of us have preferred way to structure our narratives. not only do we tell stories in a particular way. Okay. So I have a wife who every time she has to tell me a story, I have to sit down, have a cup of tea, put my feet up on an ottoman or up in the air, because I'm going to go all around the world. So it's like yesterday I saw my friend Sophia. And you know who Sophia is? Sophia is my godchild's mother. And we met when my mother and my father had first moved to Sullana before they bought the house. They didn't buy the house in Sullana because they really wanted a house in Sullana. What happened is they wanted a farm in Sullana, and the farm they wanted in Sullana wasn't available. So they needed to live somewhere while they were going to get the farm. So they bought the house. And that was because they didn't want to live in Callao anymore, because Callao got really bad. The people there and it got really bad. It was like muggings and stuff and dangerous. And, Sullana is getting bad too. The muggings here are getting worse than they ever were before, because the Venezuelans moved in after Venezuela had that big issue going on with their bankruptcy and everything. And they were letting all the criminals come across the border, and they came into Peru. And now we have these like Venezuelan gangs. And there's people, who beg for money, like in India. In India, the people beg for money, and you're going to go all around the world. That's the way she structures stories. One idea links to another idea, links to another idea, links to another idea. And for her, it all makes sense. Now, the other thing that's interesting about it is I will be talking to her. No, it's not just men and women. I know women who are much more concise, Charlie, much more. Michaela's mother, who you knew, would never tell a story like that. Nancy would be like, okay, I'm going to tell you what happened yesterday. I met Sophia, my child's mother. We had lunch, and then we came home. That's the story.
Well, generally speaking.
And then I would go, what'd you have for lunch? Why is that important? You want to process everything, Joseph. So, so the thing is, that's a structure. That's a structure of how people create a story, right? And that structure for them makes sense. And one of the things that will happen is I'll be sitting in the car. Mimi will turn to me and go, so Tuesday's okay, right? I'm like, for what? I have no idea what you're talking about, hon. In her head, she's got the whole story worked out already. And she just needs to know if I'll be available Tuesday at 10 o'clock to do whatever it is she had worked out in her head that she needs to have happen for Tuesday morning, that I have something to be involved with. Okay. And we have this common thing where I go, hun, you need to start at the beginning for me. I know you know the whole story, but I haven't been in it yet. So bring me up to date. Tell me what we're doing on Tuesday. And then she'll tell me, right? The problem is I'm afraid to ask that question.
Right.
Do you know why? Because I have to go around the world to get that answer. Right? Now, there's other people, like I was talking about Mick's mom, Nancy, who was very, very direct and very straightforward and very concise. She got to the point because for her, it was all about getting to the point. That's why she was telling the story, not to tell a story. And that's a completely different structure. And all of you have preferred structures in your head of how you make sense of the world and how you keep memories intact. So one of the questions you can ask yourself is, do you keep your memories intact as single files? This memory is about this thing. Or do you keep your memories in place by this thing is connected to all these other things, and they kind of, for me, all go together? Right? And maybe you do a little of each depending on context. So in this context, it's very straightforward. This file is very clean and very straightforward. And in another one, it's all around the world. Right? So that's a question to begin to understand the strategies that you have to tell stories. And the reason this is important is because if the story doesn't change, you won't change. But you can't change the story outside of the structure of the way the story is held. You have to know how people tell their stories if you want to change somebody else. But you have to know how you tell your own stories if you want to change yourself. Okay? Any of you ever wanted to do anything which you really did want to do, but you didn't get it done? Like something that's still outstanding that you want. What is it, Sandra? What are you nodding your head about? You got to take it off mute for me to know.
Well, I have changed several times, and then I come back to my same story.
Okay.
And that is about the weight. No, I
This is a classic one.
Yeah, I usually exercise and everything. And now I have a knee injury that I'm going to require a surgery. And I know that in order to get recovered as soon as possible, I need to be in better shape. And it's not that I haven't done it before, but now that is like, it's a conflicting story, no? Because I know that in this moment is not something that is nice to do, but it's something that is necessary to do. So that is
So do you hear the structure of her story? What are you hearing? What are you noticing about the structure of her story? There's already structural elements there. You're all hearing the same thing I am. Take some guesses.
Seems to me that she's fluctuating between two concepts or two or three concepts. She's like hitting these different bases that need to be satisfied in order for her to find a solution.
Okay. So how is she doing that? Anybody?
I think she's making, well, are you talking about modalities? Because it feels like she's making pictures in her
There's
head.
a way she's able to do that, what you just talked about, fluctuating between stories.
I'm not aware.
How is time organized for her in this story? How is time in this story organized for her?
In the past.
In the past?
Yeah.
And future.
She has to lose weight so that she will be able to recover faster from the surgery she's going to have.
Right.
Is that in the past?
No, the solutions are from the past.
Okay, so what she's doing, she's overlapping time.
Yeah.
So she's compressing past, present, and future into a single time experience as though it's all one time happening now. Hear that? So if you want to help Sandra change the story, one of the things you'd have to do is unravel that time and then compress it again. You'd have to help her sequence the time experiences so she understands that what had happened is not happening and doesn't necessarily need to happen. Does that make sense? Makes sense to Sandra. She's going. Right? So that's like, it's just that easy. This is when you understand the structure of narrative, you begin to understand how stories are structured. You can recognize very quickly what has to happen for a person to be able to change their story. This is a structural question of time. It's a temporal question. So I go, okay, so there was a time where you in the past had lost weight and then gained weight. And it seems to be a loop that you get into where it's not something that you sustain in a way that would be easier and nicer for you to be able to do. Right? But right now, what's actually happening is there's an injury in place, which is challenging you to be able to do things that you want to be able to do. But you know that in the future, it's going to be easier for you to recover as long as you can lose the weight that you intend to and keep it that way.
Mm-hmm.
So at what point in time would you have to be able to look back after you've recovered from the surgery and lost the weight to know that you sustained the weight you lost?
Like January 2026.
Okay. So like a full year of sustaining the weight that you want to be at would be evidence for you that you lost the weight and kept it off. And how would that change things?
How would that change my story, or how would that change?
How would it be? What would be different for you as a result of that, other than the fact that you'd lost weight and kept it off?
That I would have passed through several things that happened during the year that usually get me back to weight, like celebrations, holidays, and knowing that I can pass through all these events and maintaining a healthy weight would be something that would show me that I'm able to accomplish it.
So before the holidays or the celebrations, would you be saying things to yourself that are different than you've said to yourself in the past?
Yes.
How important is that to be able to have a different story you tell yourself before the event?
I consider that if I change the stories, I will not fall into the idea of indulging myself in things or do it in a moderate way. And that is something that for me is very difficult.
Okay.
You know?
So if it was like 2027,
Uh-huh.
would you know the stories you had told yourself in 2025 that let you succeed to keep the weight off?
Yes, if I'm in 2027 still maintaining my healthy weight and muscular tone, I'm sure that I will remember that that is the important thing to do.
Right. So how would those stories be different from the stories you told yourself in the past?
My health is more important than the immediate pleasure.
Mm-hmm. Got it. So there's a through time consideration where you're able to not just have the experience of the moment, but understand the consequence of the experience.
Yes.
So this is, by the way, a huge shift. This is a shift in the level of understanding and calibrating complexity. See, most people operate in one of two ways. There's still a very large portion of the world that operates completely reflexively. So they're literally, it's like they're responding in the moment. What something's happening, and everything is driven by the stimulus that's present in the moment. And that's what determines their action in the moment. The stimulus is driving the experience. There's another portion of the world, another big portion of the world, which operates opportunistically. Because it's possible, they will. Right? Now, there's a very small portion of the world which operates consequentially. And they go, after I do this thing, or after I've made this decision and taken this action, then what that will mean is that this and this will happen. So the decisions they're making are actually not to get outcomes. The decisions they're making are to get the outcome of the outcome.
Mm-hmm.
See, like, so I go, I want to do this project because somebody's going to pay me $100,000 to do it. That's opportunistic. And it changes the approach I take to the project. If I go, I'm going to do this project because somebody's going to pay me $100,000 to do it. And when I have that $100,000, then I can, take care of these bills that I have outstanding, but I'll still have enough left over to open a bank account where I can do the savings thing with it. And I can still take 10% of that and use it for charity. And then I can really support the organization that I believe in. That's consequential. I don't want to make the money because I can make the money. I'm not deciding to do it because 100,000 is a good value for the service I'm providing. I'm doing it because making $100,000 opens up a pathway to me that would be unavailable had I not made that 100,000. And I've worked out what that means to me, which maintains my interest and my motivation through even the point of getting the value received. So people who think opportunistically, one of the challenges they have is they take on the project, they get paid $100,000, and now they have 6 months or a year or 2 years that they have to invest in the project they've already been paid for. And within a month or 2 months, they find it really hard for themselves to maintain the motivation to do what it is they've been paid to do already, because it doesn't feel like they're getting rewarded for it. Right? Because all humans are dopamine junkies. That's just the reality of what it is to be human. So we want to get our dopamine spurts. So as long as that dopamine, as long as it's spurting away, we're all happy, right? But once we got paid, we got a big splash, and then it dwindles and drizzles away. It evaporates, and we feel like we're empty. But we still have 2 years of commitment. Now we resent the fact that we took the project, right? But the person who's consequential goes, oh, wait a second. I've got the 100,000 and I've invested it. The money that I invested, not only did it take care of my bills, and I no longer have that stress that was there when I couldn't take care of the bills, but the money I've invested is making money for me, and it's increasing the value of what they paid me. So by the time this project is done, it won't have been $100,000 they pay me. It will have been $107,052.37, because that's what the investment will yield. And by the way, Since I donated 10% to that charity I really like, 3 people have the opportunity to get the operations they need. And now I will have really helped 3 people in the world that I didn't even know. And I feel good about that. So every time I'm working on this project, I think of those 3 people that are alive because I'm doing the work I'm currently doing. And by the way, another consequence of doing this work, and all of a sudden they begin to build consequential, and they build this story. This is the narrative, right? And they structure their sense of time differently. So their experience of time today actually is organized in relation to the time they're going to be at when they achieve the outcome they intended and the result of getting that outcome as well. So it's like for you today, knowing that you'll feel a different way in 2026 when you've kept the weight off. And in 2027, you'll have the memory of what it took to do that, which has now become a pattern that you can use anytime, anywhere for as long as you like. Changes everything because you already have it now. Does that make sense?
Yep.
So you guys understand that, what I just did? I told you what I was going to do before I did it. You're going to unwind the time. I'm going to lay it out sequentially and chronologically. And then I'm going to collapse it all back into one moment in time because that's how she organizes her stories. So now it fits the internal framework she has for how she makes sense of her stories. So here's the challenge as you as listeners have sometimes, is you're trying to make sense of it as though it's for you. All that will do is create confusion. Because it's not a story for you, it's a story for her. Right? So what you want to do is you want to understand the structure of your stories. So let's do a breakout. You should be able to do breakouts now that you're in control and not my other brain. And let's do like 4 people. So we got 22 people, like 5 groups. There'll be like 6 people, but there'll actually be 5 people in each group because you and I won't go in groups. So there'll be 5 groups.
Just to say to all the people who don't have their cameras on, if there's 4 people in a room that don't have their cameras on, it's probably not going to be.
Put your darn camera on. What do you want from me? Or do it first. Do it over audio. I don't care how you do it because all you're going to do is tell a story, right? Sure. And you'll have less markers, less information, but you can. I work with people on telephone all the time. I work with people in text, so you can still do it. So what I want you to do is I want you to think of something that you would like to have done that you haven't done yet. So it's got to have these 2 components. Something you had decided that you wanted to do, that you still may do, but it hasn't happened yet. And I just want you to tell people what that is. And the other 3 people in the group, you're going to listen for how they structure that story. Okay, that's all I want you to do. I'm not asking you to do any change. You're not doing any change work. You're not going to be clever, hypnotic coaches doing profound transformational facilitation. You're just identifying the structure. What's true of the way they tell the story. Now, it could be temporal. It could be spatial. It could be linguistic. There's lots of different ways people put structure into their stories, but you just want to identify the story. Then you're going to come back, and then we'll talk about what you can do with those structures. And I'll take it a little further into the idea of narratology as a process that you can use to create transformation. Okay? Groups of 4. Tell a story about something that you would have liked to have done that you haven't done yet. Whether or not you still intend to do it is irrelevant. Something you'd like to have done that you haven't done yet. And then the 3 people in the group are going to identify the structure of how you tell that story, what's true of the structural pattern, and then you're going to come back here. So it shouldn't take more than like 3 minutes a person. So we give them 15 minutes, which means you have 3 minutes to get up and pee and have a glass of water, shake your left foot out, whatever you need to do, but we'll be back in 15 minutes.
Oh, it's the actual gang. Okay.
Tuesday night.
You're all right, kid. I'm nearly done.
I think that's it. I think there's actually 21.
There's 19 people left because I'm counting you and I are in that participants.
There may be one other room that's still open. Yeah,
Okay.
I guess I'll probably closed automatically.
So how'd that little exercise go for you all? Good is not an answer. I want to know what happened. I want you to tell me a story. I'm lonely. Help me out. Make me feel.
Once upon a time, in a time that was not a time, in a place neither here nor there.
So what happened? You went off, you spent a few minutes chatting with each other. What happened in those chats?
Many of us didn't have outcomes of outcomes.
Meaning, so what happened? You didn't have outcomes of outcomes.
But we talked about the past and the future.
Right.
And many of us didn't have outcomes. We just were like in this place of, I don't know, just talking about things in our future that haven't manifested yet and no way to get there, or at least no seemingly plan to get there.
Okay. So what I'm hearing is, if you're saying what I'm hearing, and you may not be, that you talked about a future point, but there was no future after the future.
Okay.
Is that what happened? It's like you kind of got stuck at the future. It's like, I'd like this thing to happen, but it hasn't happened. I don't know how it's going to happen. So I'm kind of feeling stuck about it happening.
Yes.
Right. Okay. That's relatively common, by the way. And one of the ways that people commonly get themselves stuck is they get stuck at a point in time where they don't have clarity about what will happen there. Let me share something with you. If you ever want to write anything down about what I say, the two things worth writing down I'm going to give you right now. These are pretty much the only two things I would ever tell anybody to write down ever that I say. One is, you cannot know what you do not know until you know it. It's a self-evident truth. You simply cannot know what you do not know until you know it. It's just that simple, right? But everybody wants to know what they cannot know before they know it. So they want to know what's going to happen. If I marry this man, if I marry this woman, what's going to happen? You know, if I buy this lottery ticket, will I win? If I, and they want to know the answer to a future event that hasn't happened yet, that's unknowable in the present moment. So you got to first stop there. Get yourself settled in that idea. You cannot know what you do not know until you know it. Right. And the second thing, the corollary of that, as I like to talk about it, is you cannot do what you haven't done until you've done it. Now, that one's more confusing for people because they think they do things that they haven't done. But the reality is, once they've done them, they've actually done them. So it's like you can't surf until you're standing on the board and you're riding the wave. Only when you've done that can you say, I've surfed. So you can't do what you haven't done until you've done it. Right? And the difference between where you are today, not having done it, and doing it is all the things that happen in between. Right? So sometimes it's learning 4,000 steps that after you learn to do it, seems like just one step. So literally, for instance, the simplest example of what I just said is when you were learning to walk, learning to lift your foot and put it on the ground in front of you while you maintained the balance on the foot that was still on the ground and transferred your weight forward into the foot that had now landed. So you could bring the other foot either equal with it or ahead of it, which is what we call walking. Seems like one thing to you now. All I did is I took a step. For you, taking a step seems like one thing, right? It's just one thing you're doing. But you're not doing one thing. You're transferring your weight. You're establishing balance. You're shifting through space and time. You're manipulating your balance as that foot goes forward because where your balance and the center of your balance is, when your foot's behind you, as it moves through the arc past the foot that's now on the ground to a position in front of it, changes the weight distribution. So you've got to be adjusting muscularly all of the things you need to do to maintain that balance point as your balance position changes, because the weight distribution changes. Now, I know you don't think about that, but you have to learn to do all of that. You have to learn to feel your foot on the ground. Now, that sounds really simple and absurd, but if you ever watch little kids, you can see them as they're learning to walk. They don't know when their foot touches the ground. Sometimes they think it's already there and they fall forward. Sometimes they don't know it's on the ground, and you watch them actually trying to push their foot to the ground when it's already there. So there's all these things you had to learn to do this simple one-step thing, taking a step. So there might be 4,000 steps in learning how to take one step, but only after you've done all those things and incorporated them all can you say you've done the thing we call taking a step. Right? So you can't do what you haven't done until you've done it. And you have to do all the things it takes to be able to do the thing you haven't yet done. Now, the challenge, of course, and Vishali, I think this is what you're pointing to indirectly, is that people are leaping forward to something that seems like it should be relatively simple because it seems to them like it's just one thing to do. But the reality is, to do that one thing, there might be 4,000 or 10,000 things you have to do to be able to accomplish that one thing. Right? So we never organize when we're stuck. When we're stuck, we never organize down to a level that's simple enough for us to actually accomplish what we need to accomplish to move on to the next thing. Because we're thinking we're at the next thing when we're actually 10 steps or 20 steps or 1,000 steps ahead of the next thing. So this ability to back into the next thing is really important. And this means you've got to change the structure of your story. And this is where I introduce this idea in the way that I teach narrative to people when I'm working with them as clients, actually, is I teach them this idea of what I call fractal navigation. And fractal navigation is understanding the distinctions between micro, meso, macro, and meta sizes, right? So if I wanted to save $1,000, just make it simple. I want to save $1,000. Well, the first thing I have to do is I have to understand the micro nature of what it means to save $1,000. And the micro nature of saving $1,000 is that I have to have something to put away in savings. Now, it can be a penny, it could be $1, it could be $10, it could be $100, or it can be $1,000. But I first have to have access to that resource before I can save that money. And it seems obvious, right? It's so obvious that people skip it because they don't think about how am I going to get the money I'm going to save, because that comes before saving it. So they go to the end, they think they're going to have $1,000 saved, but then they don't understand. They go, okay, well, once I understand that I'm going to make money so that I can save the money, that's actually a step before saving the money. How much will I have from what I make that I can put into this thing I'm calling saving? Right? And then they realize, well, all I can put away is this very small amount. It's going to take me a very long time to do that. So the distance between where they are and what they want to accomplish now seems to them to have grown exponentially. It's not just saving $1,000. It's 18 months to save $1,000. And now they think about that process and it's challenging. So you begin to look at the micro and then you look at the meso. The meso is the middle ground in between the micro and the macro. And the meso size is the decisions you have to make that get you from micro moving to macro. So it's those in-between decisions. And the in-between decision will be the reality that in order to save anything out of what you make, it means you're not going to have to spend it. I know that sounds absurd again, but think about people who don't save money. That's what's missing. What's missing for people who don't save money or have money to invest is they spend the money they have. Therefore, they don't have it to invest. Does that make sense? And I understand how this might seem really trivial and obvious, but for people who are having struggle doing these things, what's the micro to meso step is not obvious or trivial. It's a block. It's a sticking point. And then the macro position is what will happen when I get close to having the 1,000 that will keep me going so I don't stop at 995 thinking I've got enough. See, this is one of the big challenges with goal setting, is that the closer you get to your goal, the less motivating the goal becomes. Now, there are a few people who don't organize that way, very few, by the way. Mm-hmm. But for most people, they get to a point where they go, it's good enough, especially if getting there was difficult. Okay. So I will use Sandra's example. People want to lose weight and they go, I need to cut down to 1,800 calories a day. Let's just say they're calorie counting. I'm not suggesting that that's how you should do it, by the way, but I'm just going to use the example. So they're going to get down to 1,800 calories a day. And they track and they go, wow, I've only eaten 1,500 calories today. That means I got 300 calories left over. So they eat a chocolate cake. And it's like they skip that last piece, which will make all the difference, that gets them to where they're going. Because when they get close, it feels like they're there. And they get that little dopamine. That's what happens. Once dopamine takes over, you're lost. Okay? Do any of you have the thing where you cannot eat something with no problem, but once you start eating it, it's difficult to stop eating it? Mm-hmm. Chocolate, pizza, ice cream, steak, somebody, whatever it is, right?
Potato chips.
Happens, Andre. You know? So the thing is that you start getting into this and you begin to understand that you're operating in a way where the ability to manage the full process is what gets you from micro to macro. And the macro is understanding the whole thing isn't there until the whole thing is there. Now, the meta is the outcome of the outcome. It's the outframe. It's like, why are we even doing this at all? What are we getting from this? Right? Does anybody have, anything from 1 cent or the equivalent of a US 1 cent to more than that in the bank? Any of you have 1 cent or more in the bank? Okay. What good is it doing you there? Who cares? Do any of you really care that you have money in the bank? So people are really excited. I've got, $100,000. I've got $1 million. I've got $20. I've got $200. I've got this bank account with some money in it. And they think that that's what it is, but that's not what it is. It's that, if that money is there, it's available to do something you want to do with it, if and when you want to do it, or should you need it, it's there for you to have access to. So it's not about having money in the bank, right? And people who get obsessed with more money don't quite figure this equation out ever, because they never get to the point where they have enough. So their life is driven now by more. More is a terrible disease. Okay. More is like one of the worst diseases you can get, because it prevents you from doing anything other than getting more. Right. And it could be anything. It could be money. It can be fitness. It can be health. Right. So I'm really healthy, but I could be even more healthy. Right. Okay. Doing really well. I'm like, a good artist, but I could be a better artist. I've written a couple of books. I can write more books. It's like more, And again, what's happening is the very idea of more, you know what it does? Shoots that dopamine into your brain. You begin to think of what it's going to be like to have more. And you get all excited about it. And then what happens is you don't have the more. Then you get the dopamine dropout. Now you're depressed and upset. So what you do is you do one of two things. Now there's two kinds of people. I will tell you, I've worked with both kinds of people. They have equal issues, just different issues. The two kinds of people are the ones who get the dopamine dropout and get depressed, and they go, fuck it. And they go lay on a couch and they do depression. Right? You get the other ones who go, oh shit. And they think more about what it is they want. And either now they're in a cycle of mania to get what they want, and everything has gone away except getting what they want, or they think about getting what they want. For some people, that's the same thing as actually getting it. The fascination and fantasy they have about getting what they want that they're actually not getting, but they're thinking about getting it, feels as good to them as getting it, which means they never get it. Again, stories. These are stories, and they run your life. If you don't understand your autobiography, if you don't understand how you've told yourself about who you are and what reality is, you don't own your life. Your story owns your life, and you don't own your story. Right? There was a great kids book. My daughter disappeared. I don't know if she's in the background or something, but there was a kid book called Inked. And it was about this story, these characters who come off the page. Right? Is that the name of the book, Mick? Inked?
It's Inkheart.
Inkheart. Thank you, Bib. Inkheart. And it's about these characters who come off the page and come into reality. And one of them figures out that if he's in reality, he can write the story. So he changes who he is and what he's capable of and what happens in the story, because now that he's outside the book, he can write the story. This is exactly what happens. When you get out of your own head, you can write your story. As long as you're in your story, you can't write your story. Your story is writing you. So I'll talk about that in a sec because I want to answer Jessica. Yeah, Jess.
Hi, Joseph. I really relate to that thing of like doing the thing good enough. Like in some areas of my life, I'm like really meticulous, but in some areas, I'm like really, I notice that if I've got like a bit of a margin of error, that's what I call it. Like I'll take it, and it can be with like, especially with money and food. I'm like, oh, I ate well enough today. I deserve a little treat. Or, you know, I've got a bit of extra money that I didn't know I had. I'll definitely spend that, you know, and I really despise that part of me, and I'm desperate to change that bit of my story because it sucks. And I would like to be more, you know, the margins of error are really screwing me. They're not good margins of error.
So I'm going to ask you a question.
Sure.
Whose story is that?
I mean, the first thing that popped into my head when you said that was like my dad's, you know, like I see that a pattern in my dad, and then it's mine. It's obviously mine.
No,
but
it's not. It's not yours. It's a story you tell yourself, but that doesn't necessarily make it your story.
Yeah.
See, we get stories put into us by others. We also pick stories up that are hanging around loose on the side of the street, and they look interesting, so we grab them and take them home with us. But they're not our stories. Right? So there's a story before that story about who you actually are. So there's a story about who you are in regard to what's important to you, about the way you eat, that's actually important to you, and not to the impositions and expectations that were placed upon you about how you eat and what's important to eat. Right? Because anybody who overeats, truly overeats, they think they won't have enough. So somewhere the story got distorted that enough isn't enough, or that it might not be there tomorrow. Right? So I'm really good at that story, by the way. I'll tell you how I'm really good at it. If I go to a restaurant, and there are people who've gone to restaurants with me who can verify this and tell you, if there's like 17 appetizers that look interesting, I order them all. Because I'm never going to be able to go back to that restaurant again. I'm never going to be able to have that appetizer anywhere else in my life ever. And I got to have it now. And I got to taste all of them right now, today, here. Bring them now. Right? And I know what drives that is literally, I'm not calibrating. I don't need to eat all this today. I can eat it tomorrow. Now, there's a difference if I was truly that hungry. I mean, I got Mike Halpfish on the call, so I've got to cover all the bases here. Like, if I was Mike Halpfish, I would order 17 because that wouldn't be enough to satisfy my hunger. But I don't eat like that. I would only want to eat like literally a forkful of all 17. And then there would be 17 plates left of a lot of food that didn't get eaten that I would have to take home. Now, the problem with that is that when I take it home, now I'm going to hear a story from my wife about why there's all this food in the refrigerator that's not going to get eaten. And if my daughter's there, she'll chime in and reinforce that story, that I overorder and I shouldn't be ordering so much food because nobody eats it. Right? But I know what's going on in my head. What's going on in my head is I think this is really all exciting and interesting. They would all taste fantastic. I don't know which one I really want, so I'll have them all. And I don't need them all. So as soon as I change the story, I go, and I go, which one do I want to have today? Because then I can come back tomorrow, and I can come back on Friday, I can go back on Thursday, and I can have 17 days of trying different appetizers if I want. And I can even try 2 today. That would be okay, because I could probably actually finish 2 and be happy with it. And then I could look forward to what I didn't have for tomorrow. So as soon as I changed the story, and what I recognize is there was a deep imprint from when I was really a little kid where I didn't think there might be enough of something and I wouldn't get to have it. Right? So you don't need to know my whole personal history about how this came out and why and where and all that. But once I got the story, I'm able to more take choices with deliberation and intensity. So all of a sudden, there you are, and you've gotten to the point where you think you've eaten really well. And then you think, I'm going to go to bed in 3, 4, 5, 6 hours, whatever it may be, when you had that last meal, right? And I'm going to be laying in bed and I'm going to be thinking about how well I ate today because I actually finished the day eating really well. So that thing that I was about to do hasn't happened because I'm actually in bed in my mind thinking about how good I feel that I actually finished the day eating well every day. Now, the other thing is, your dad's still around? Is he alive?
No.
Okay. So what I would do, I would still give him back his story. Okay. So, every culture on the planet at some time in the history of their culture used burnt offerings. You know what a burnt offering is? So I would write it out and I would burn it and give it back to him in the smoke that rises from whatever you're burning. And then that would be an interesting story. So next time you come back, you can go, hey, Joseph, listen, I know it was crazy and it sounded like maybe you were even teasing me a little bit, but then I realized you weren't. And so I went after we talked and I wrote down this story about my dad giving me this thing that wasn't mine. That's really his story. And then I burnt it and I watched the smoke go up in the air. And I don't know what happened, but for a week, I've been really, really good about the way I eat and never think about it. It's just now become automatic.
I'll do it. I love a bit of fire burning. I'm very partial to a nice fire
totally.
ritual. I definitely do one.
Yeah. And if you want to make it really interesting, get some like beef tallow and put it on there too, because that helps the gods, be satisfied too.
Okay. Thank you.
So Vishali, what was the thing, either your story or somebody else's, where you kind of got stuck in the future?
Well, 2 stories. I mean, that's coming to mind because, like the one that I used, and then there was one that Nicola spoke about, but me having a dog in the future, or having a dog now, but I put a lot of limitations on the future because they're another being that takes a lot of time, and I don't know if I want to commit myself to that time. So that was one.
So, okay, so stay there with that one. What makes you think you're stuck?
Stuck what? With the dog?
Yeah, no, stuck with this decision or this having or not having. Because you said that we kind of got stuck. We kind of got to a point where they didn't see a way for it to happen.
As my life is right now.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the question is, what? How'd I get stuck?
Yeah. What's this? I'm not sure what you're stuck on. What's the stuckness?
Just that, is there a place for me? Is there a place for dog in my life right now? I love them to bits, and I don't know if they really fit into my
So is
life.
that what you're stuck on, or you're stuck on what you would have to give up if you had a dog to make space for it?
Maybe that.
Because if you really wanted a dog, you and I both know you could do what it would take to have a dog.
Right.
What you're really saying is, I'm not willing to give up what I'd have to give up to do what it would take to have a dog.
Exactly.
So you're not stuck at all. You're just making a decision about whether you're willing to give up those things so you can have a dog, and whether the dog would give you enough reward and compensation and pleasure in your life to lose the things that you'd give up so that you can have that dog, like the sense of freedom you might have right now.
Right. So then do you want the other story?
I don't know. Are you done with this story? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it's a decision. I've made a decision. So maybe there's nothing stuck about it at all. It's just a decision not to have one.
Right. Well, the specific decision is, are you going to give up what it's going to take to have a dog?
No.
Right. So there's no decision. It's already made.
I guess so. You're right.
Right. So what you're trying to do is here's, I understand what you're doing. You're going, I want to have a dog and not give up what it would take to have a dog, but have a dog anyway. So I want to live in a universe other than the one I'm actually in, where I can suspend time, where I need to be taking care of the dog. So it goes into frozen animation. So when I get back and I do have the time, I can do what I need to do for the dog and still do all the things I want to do with that time when I'm not around with the dog to take care of it. Like I have 2 time zones that I could live in and make, and you get it?
Right. Or it could be, yes. Or it could be like the limitation is also someday when I have a house backyard and I don't need to work and I have the freedom already, then the dog would fit my life better.
Sure. You could do all those things. You just have to make the decision if getting there or being there today is worth it would take to do to get there or be there today or in the future. But you've already made the decision. You're just fucking with yourself.
I'm just what?
Fucking with yourself.
Yeah. Well, yeah, it was a story.
Like I want a dog and I don't know if I should really have a dog. And yes, you know everything you need to know. In this particular case, you know everything.
Yeah.
You want a dog, you know what it takes to have a dog. You recognize that to do what you'd have to do to have the dog, you'd have to give up what you currently have. You're not willing to give up what you currently have, so you can't have a dog.
Well, I was really coming up with like, what can I come up with a story of something that I want to do in the future that I haven't done yet? So it's like, dog, So 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 it wasn't like I had any big plans in the future that I haven't So
you could also listen. You haven't had quintuplets. You could adopt quintuplets.
Yeah, that'd be the last thing I do.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. See, it's really interesting. I'm listening to this story and I'm playing with the structure behind it. Right. There's a structure here of how she runs these multiple scenarios that are mutually incompatible. Right. And then creates internal justifications for how it might be possible, if only. Right. So I'm not going to do it with you. But let's make believe that we were going to go further. The question I would be asking right now is, what is it that you think isn't present that a dog would fulfill for you that you don't have? So you can think about that. I'm not looking for an answer. I'll leave it rhetorical, because I would even argue you don't want a dog. You want what you think the dog is going to give you that you don't think you currently have. And then I would make a counter argument that you may already have what it is you think the dog is going to give you, but you're not noticing it.
I agreed.
Right. But if you enjoy being in conflict with yourself, feel free to play the dog story.
Sure, okay. It's just what came up. It's nothing I live with every day.
Listen, it's amusing. It's an amusing story. And the thing is, until you have a dog, you could be playing with, I could get a Maltese, I could get a Boston Terrier, I could have a French Bulldog, I could have a Pyrenees, I could have a Great Dane. And you can have all these different dogs in your mind without ever having to own any of them, which would be way more satisfying than actually having to clean poop every day. Right? That's the advantage of driving to the ice cream store. Until you get there, you can have all the flavors.
I can't tell you how many times I have sat in a chair and thought about all the things I could cook for dinner. And by the time I got through the whole list of things, I was no longer hungry.
So are you guys hearing like what I'm talking about, this idea of how the biography, the autobiography, the stories you tell yourself kind of shape your reality? So making more sense than maybe it did when we first started talking. And I'm giving you a secondary piece of information, which is that not just the story shapes your reality, but the very structure of the story. When you unwind the structure, you can unwind the story. And usually in between the story that you're telling and the story you could be telling, there's revelation. It opens up massive possibility and massive dynamic potential to create things that you've never created. And this is the big thing. When I work with people who are extraordinary, and people are extraordinary in different ways, Warren Buffett is different in his extraordinariness than Michael Jordan. They're just extraordinary individuals in their domain of being extraordinary, but different, right? But anybody who's extraordinary in any domain, one of the things they possess is a kind of sense of certainty attached to creativity. They have an ability to put themselves in a mental position and then embody that position in such a way that for them, the thing they intend becomes inevitable as a felt experience, as a lived experience. So it's for them, everybody else is watching them, and to everybody else, it looks like they're moving towards getting something or toward making something happen. For them, they're living with the thing they're moving towards having already happened. It's not present for them. It's fully present for them already. So they're living out of the position where the thing's already happened. And when you live out of a position where the thing you desire has already happened, you act in a way where the person who has that thing would act, where the person who does that thing would act. It doesn't make sense to you not to have it. It's inevitable. And I really enjoy watching kind of extreme sports for this reason. Because when you watch extreme athletes, the only way they could do what they do is by having already organized themselves to having it done in their body and mind before they begin it. It's not like they're wondering if it'll work, right? When it doesn't work, they're actually shocked. So you watch these guys are trying to do these amazing feats of whatever, somebody who's like a BMX biker and wants to, take the bike up a ramp and do a 270 before they land. In their mind, if they only get a 180 and fall down, they're shocked. Like, how did that happen? Like in their mind, the 270 was so present, so there. They're surprised it didn't happen. They're not shocked when it does. Everybody else around them is shocked when it does. Right? So this is the shift you want to make. You want to be able to understand the ability to move into the future beyond the future is the position of the story that you want to tell. You want to tell yourself the stories about what's happened as a result of you having already done what it is you intend to do. That's a far more profoundly powerful story to tell than the story about what you want to do. And the best way to tell that story from the future is in the structure of how you tell yourself your best stories already. So I'm going to give you a suggestion, recommendation. I'll come to you, Jess. I see your hand up. I'm going to recommend you think of the best story you tell yourself about yourself and unwind the structure of that and make it the structure of the stories you tell yourself, about the things you haven't yet done. Okay. Jessica. Yeah. Go ahead.
I'm being so greedy with questions, but I just something that if I am in this creative space where I am, the thing that I want has already happened. Sometimes when I'm in that space, that means I don't do the action to make the thing happen because it's already happened.
I understand.
So like if I'm like, I already own the house of my dreams, then I'm like, well, then I don't have to save for the house of my dreams. That's where I get caught up. So I'm like,
so here's the question. What would owning the house of your dreams get you? This is the outcome of the outcome question.
Security and safety and just knowing that I don't have
do you
to
already
move
feel
again.
secure and safe?
Yes, but it's like a temporary thing. I know that I won't in like 5 years when I have to move again.
So if you're using security and safety to motivate you to do something you haven't done, but you already feel secure and safe, you're not going to be motivated.
Yeah.
Right. So, by the way, it's like what I'm asking Vishali. Like, why do you need a house? You don't have a house of your dreams. You're feeling secure and safe already. Why not just keep doing what you're doing? What would having a house do for you?
Because that will eventually end, like, and I'll have to move from here.
Listen, we have, I was paying attention to what was going on in California when the wildfires happened.
Yeah. So,
Mel Gibson, Harrison Ford, all these guys who had multi-million-dollar mansions up on the hill, they don't have them anymore. That shit ends too.
Yeah, I know. My friend's house burnt to smithereens.
Impermanence, you got to become a Buddhist for at least 10 minutes and go into the whole idea of impermanence is the reality of life. So once you get past the idea of impermanence, that all things end, why would you want to have a house?
Well, but then why would I want to do anything?
I don't know. I'm not you.
I mean, so serious. Like if there's no, that's a sort of kind of what's the point question. Like, what's the point to any of it?
Well, I'm definitely not a nihilist, so that question doesn't make sense to me, because there's all kinds of stuff that I do because in the moment I do it, it feels really good to do it.
But if I only chase what feels good in the moment, then I'm going to be like dopamine mad, never accomplish anything. It'll just be like me eating sweets, doing crack, and I don't know, doing all sorts of mad
Well,
things.
you and I have very different things that make us feel good in the moment.
No, I don't do crack.
Like one of the things
way,
that feels good for me in the moment is writing a book that I'm working on, because what I'm actually holding in my mind is how it'll feel even better when I've written the book.
Yeah, I mean,
And then
like
what helps me, by the way, is I have in my mind the people who will read the book that I've written and their response to it.
Yeah, no, that's I mean, I think for me that's like an assumption of life that like creative things are the only thing that like bring me any kind of true pleasure, and like
Right.
that's the only thing I would do. But like as a sort of bigger goal outside of that.
But just go back to the goal you started with. Why have a house? If you can't answer the question, you're not going to get one.
I suppose it's for me a bit of a creative project. Like it's a nice place to have people around to do things.
Oh, there you go.
Like me up,
Right.
to have creative conversations. It's another part of a bigger dream.
So when you think of having an apartment, let's say, or a flat, right, that you're in now, I don't know what you're in, or you're renting
a house,
or you're renting a house, right? It doesn't matter. And you think about what it's like for that place that you're in, that's rented and not owned, expressing you and who you are, versus the place you own expressing you and who you are. Is that a different experience?
A little bit, because I'd be able to do more things that I like doing.
Is that important?
A bit, yeah.
Important enough to get a house and not rent?
I think so. I think to me it is, yeah.
Okay. So that would be a reason. See, that becomes a reason. I don't know if it's the reason, but you have to figure out why you actually want a house. Other than it seems like something that everybody aspires to, therefore you should do it.
No, for me, it's not that. I've never been like, oh, I must get married, oh, I must do it. Like, in fact, I've almost been the opposite, and it's so late in life that I'm like, actually, I do want this.
How old are you?
42 this year.
Okay. It's all perspective, darling. Late in life is all perspective.
But later in life, as opposed to, in London, this is like a very competitive, sort of goals driven city where people in their 20s are like, oh, I'm buying a house so late. You're like, mate,
Hey, Mick, how old was your mom when she had you?
43.
By the way, first child. So late in life's just perspective.
Yeah, absolutely.
These are stories, Jessica.
Yeah.
They're just stories. And what you want to do is you want to kind of unwind where you are in those stories. And I mean, literally, where in space and time do you imagine yourself being as you're telling the story? And if you put yourself in the right place and time, the story will come to you that lets you have the things that you want that are actually really important to you.
Yes.
So since you know you're already an old hag, I want you to go even further and imagine yourself like at 90. And as you look back over your life from 90, what were the things that were really important to you that you've done?
Mm.
And which things are regrets that had you known them at 42, you would have behaved differently and done them?
Yeah, it's always love, people, relationships, and creative projects. That's all that really matters to me. I just think home is like the ultimate kind of love and creative project. It's like the vessel for it to happen.
I get it. I'm not suggesting you shouldn't. I'm challenging you to come up with something that holds you in its grip so powerfully that it's willing to do what it takes.
Yeah.
I always tell people, I had a conversation with my wife actually this morning about somebody doing something. And then I was saying this idea, if people really want to do something, they will do it.
Mm.
And when people say, I want, but I don't, it's they want something else more. Right? So we have this delusion that inhibition or moving away from things that causes pain and suffering are somehow more motivating than moving towards what we want. It's just not true. It's just not true. There are more people who get married, fall in love, have a decent life, raise children, get old together, who got together in the first place because they wanted to be with someone, than people who do that because they didn't want to be alone.
Absolutely.
People who don't want to be alone make really bad choices. People who want to be with someone because they want to be with that person, there's something about that person that holds them in this fascination and wonder of what it is to be alive, make much better choices about their partners. So the whole idea of not having is never a good way to make a decision. So find the things that generate in you a kind of juiciness, a passion, a sense of aliveness, and then put your attention there. And then don't worry about all the other stuff. Trust that if you're doing that, the other stuff that is important will show up in the context of what's juicy and enlivening.
That's always been the bigger plan. It just takes longer to materialize, but I always follow that. So it's just nice to be
better it takes longer to materialize than you work really hard and got it and found yourself up on the wrong building, having climbed the wrong ladder, as Mr. Campbell would say.
100%. Thank you.
Cool. Is this useful to anybody? I mean, I just love talking, so it works for me, but. All right, guys. So I'm back next week. Next week, I'm taking a completely different thing with y'all. So I'm going to talk about AI, but I'm not going to talk about it like you've heard anybody else talk about it. I don't give a damn about, all the implications of AI. What I care about is, you're welcome, Laura, is that the reality is it ain't coming. It's here. Not only is it here, it's been here. Not only is it in your life, it's been in your life. And not only is it like something you have to make, a decision about, there's no decision left to make. The only decision you have to make is what you're going to do about the fact that it's in your life and here. And I think it's really, by the way, probably one of the most profound transitions that we've experienced on the planet. This is like the equivalent in some ways of hunter-gatherer to agriculture to industry. This is a quantum sea change of what it means to be human.